our agenda today is page introduction. So if you have some pages, Senator Bowser.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Point of personal privilege. I would like to introduce my pages, and as I call your name, would you please stand and be recognized? Maya Snyder, Madison Blackwood, Isabella Wheeler, Addison Samak from Royal Valley High School. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. They've been sworn in and they're ready to go to work. And then my second group is from Centralia High School, Taryn Osterhaus and Aaron Smith. Thank you for joining us and welcome to local government.
Yes, thank you for joining us. I did bring in some students from in the hallway too to watch how we do a committee hearing and also work a bill. So they're from, I didn't ask where they were from. At Hayes, we were from Hayes, Western Kansas. So yes, so thank you for joining as well. But we do have on our agenda, first off, is final action on Senate Bill 194. And that is providing that covenants, conditions, or restrictions established between January 1, 1948 and December 31st, 1958 that restrict the use of real estate owned by state and educational institutions for only single-family residence purposes and contain discriminatory provisions to restrict ownership or tenancy by race or against public policy and therefore voided. So we had a really great hearing on this last week. We did discover that an amendment to clarify some language was needed. And at this point, I would like our reviser, Charles, to go over the, you can sit right there if you like, Charles, to go over the, yes. And it's very short, but I'll ask Charles to clarify what this is, and then we'll move on to a motion.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. So as the committee will see, this is indeed a very short amendment. It just adds the word only to line 19 there so that it reads the provisions of this section shall only apply to any covenant established between January 1, 1948 and December 31, 1958, just to make that more clear. And it also changes the effective date of the bill, if it would be passed, from statute book to Kansas Register.
Thank you, Charles. Do we have any questions on the amendment? Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as a refresher, would you tell us the difference between the statute book and Kansas Register, the dates? Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So statute book is a term that's used in bills to refer to July 1st of the year. So if it was statute book, it would be effective July 1st, 2025. If it's to be effective upon publication in the Kansas Register, that is then the date that can vary that the Kansas Register is published subsequent to the the passage of the bill and signing by the governor and all that.
Oh, wonderful. Senator Bowser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Make a motion we accept this amendment.
We have a motion, Senator Bowser, a second by Senator Clifford. Any questions? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right. Amendment is added. And would I have a motion to pass the bill out as amended? Senator Bowser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Make a motion we pass the amendment out of committee favorably.
We have a motion from Senator Bowser. I believe I saw Senator Clace, but so okay, we'll do second by Senator Fascadeau. Any questions? Senator Petty.
I just want to clarify. I'm sure that I just didn't hear it all the way through, but I think Senator Bowser meant the amended bill.
Yes, yes. And Randy has that, yes. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, motion passes. So we have Senate Bill 194 headed to the floor, and we'll get this moving as quickly as we can because we understand how important this is to Wichita State University. So wonderful. Okay. We do have committee 2 hearings on our agenda today. We have House Bill 2116 requiring that certain contractual provisions be incorporated in all contracts for certain cities and counties, including provisions of Form DA-146A with certain exceptions. Charles, would you be able to give us a briefing?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So indeed, that is what House Bill 2116 does. It creates new law requiring that certain cities and counties use standard mandatory contract provisions, the form DA 146A, and I've attached that form to my brief that I handed out to you if you want to take a look at that form. That is used by the Department of Administration for state contracts. And that form includes various provisions governing warranties, liabilities, taxes, insurance, and also the applicable law that would apply to the contract. The provisions would be required to be included in each contract and would also be deemed to be included even if not specifically contained in the contract, unless the governing body of the city or county or the Board of County Commissioners decides to omit a provision by a majority vote. There are 2 provisions, however, of that form that the bill provides may not be waived by the city or county, and those are laid out in sections 2 and 3 of the bill. Section 2 requires that cities and counties cannot assume responsibility for the actions or conduct of any other party to a contract other than the city or county and its employees, and a city or county can also not indemnify or hold any other party harmless for damages or injuries resulting from another party's conduct. Section 3 provides that all contracts executed by cities and counties be governed by the laws of Kansas and be subject to Kansas jurisdiction. Section 4 limits the application of sections 1 to 3 to cities of the 2nd or 3rd class and to any county with a population of less than 35,000. So the bill is limited in its scope by Section 4. This legislation was introduced last year, House Bill 2537. I think that Section 4 that narrows the scope of the bill was added to the bill before you. This bill passed the House 119-0, and if enacted, it would become effective July 1st, 2025.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Do we have any questions for Charles? Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Charles, so this legislation creates a new law requiring cities and counties to use the standard mandatory contract provisions. So what are they doing currently?
Well, I'm sure each city and county has their own, requirements and procedures that they use. And I'm not aware of what those would be, but they aren't currently required to use the mandatory state contract provision, and this would require them to do that.
Okay, thank you.
And again, that's limited to certain cities and counties.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any additional questions? All right, thank you, Charles. We do have written proponents, Jay Hall, Deputy Director of General Counsel, Kansas Association of Counties, and Jeff Chubb, City Attorney, City of Independence. So they're written only. We do have a neutral here in person. This would be John Goodyear, General Counsel, the League of Kansas Municipalities. So John, you're going to get to take everyone's questions. Thank you, and perhaps even Senator Fasquedo's question too, if you can directly talk.
Address that with my testimony. Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
members of the committee. My name is John Goodyear, and I'm General Counsel for the League of Kansas Municipalities. Grateful for the opportunity to provide our thoughts on this. As the reviser said, this bill was introduced last year by one of our member cities. It was introduced by the City of Independence. As a starting point, most cities negotiate these terms or similar terms into their contracts already. The City of Independence and other smaller communities that maybe lack the resources, lack the same time that other cities have, this benefits them because it builds this already into these contracts, and it kind of saves them some time on negotiation. As the bill was introduced last year, as the revisor mentioned, it applied to all cities. We got a lot of feedback from our bigger cities that do have those resources, do have those legal departments that do extensive contract review, that this wasn't needed, and in fact, it would hinder them at times. So the proponents of the bill and the House committee were open to an amendment that made it applicable to those cities that would benefit from this legislation the most. The smaller cities that will take advantage of this legislation. Something else to highlight is that the way that this bill is drafted, it ensures the highest level of local control. We'll be able to opt out of provisions that we don't like. We'll be able to opt out of the entire thing if we wanted to, and it doesn't cover those cities that didn't want to be looped in, and those counties as well. We worked with the Association of Counties to create that size drop off. So we would just ask that if this bill is to move forward, that it do so in its current form. It stay applicable to just cities of the second and third class and counties below that population threshold. I will point out one thing that did come up when I was speaking to a city about this bill yesterday. And I think it's just a matter of we pulled this directly from the bill draft last year. I didn't catch it originally. It does refer to a specific date, July 1st, 2024. There's no intent to make this bill retroactive, so slight amendment to make that July 1st, 2025, I think would be friendly and welcomed. With that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, John. I always like to know what we're solving, so I think you did a nice job explaining that.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions, committee? Okay, well, for the neutral, you did an excellent job. And we can have that amendment ready, so it won't be able to go on the consent calendar, but we can get the amendment ready and then work this, so. Right. I have no opponents at this point. We'll close the hearing on House Bill 2016 and open the hearing on House Bill 2099, permitting periodic inspections by a city or county for code violations of private residential rental houses where the property owner is receiving governmental rental subsidies. So, Charles, would you give us a briefing?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2099, as Madam Chair indicated, pertains to permitting municipal housing inspections, even where residents don't authorize it under certain specific circumstances. And this is now limited to the city of Topeka, as we will see. As introduced, House Bill 2099 amended 12-16-138 to authorize all cities and counties to inspect private residential properties in certain circumstances. And under current law, cities and counties are prohibited from conducting interior housing inspections of private residential property without the occupant's consent. The bill, as introduced, would have authorized the city or county to conduct such an inspection without the owner's consent if the property owner received governmental rental subsidies. The bill required reasonable notice of the date and time of the inspection that had to be given to the occupant, and if the tenant objected, the city or county was required to obtain an administrative search warrant. HB 2099 also provided that the landlord may be required to conduct the inspections at the request of the city or county if code violations were reported. The House Committee on Local Government amended the bill to apply only to the city of Topeka, to require an ordinance to implement the provisions of the bill, to change the requirement for such inspections that the owner of the property receive governmental rental subsidies with the term direct public financial assistance for tenant rent. And that term was defined by the House Committee as a financial payment or consideration from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. In addition, the House Committee added a sunset of July 1st, 2030. As amended by the House Committee, the bill passed the House 111-19. If enacted, this bill would become effective on July 1st, 2025.
Thank you, Charles. Senator Fascido?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Charles, so why is this legislation actually needed? Why can't the city of Topeka just through their city council, county commissioner, implement that ordinance?
So I think, as I recall, that question was addressed on the House floor. And I'm sure the proponents would be able to speak to the reasoning behind the bill and why it's necessary. So I might just defer to them to kind of lay out, the basis for why they're wanting this legislation to pass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Charles. So in layman's terms, you're saying that if that resident who is renting and receiving any type of benefits, so just even if they're in bed, sleep, or just whatever they're doing, so who could come in anytime and inspect the interior of the rental property?
Yes, I think the primary thing the bill does is it removes a requirement that the occupants have to authorize an interior inspection. And I think there were some issues about, occupants being able to do that perhaps.
So this
But again, the
eliminates
proponents can speak to
any, prior notice, a day or two notice?
Yes, there is a requirement for prior notice. Yes, that's specifically laid out in the bill.
So if I've worked hard the day before and I just want to sleep the next day like I do right now? So you mean they can just knock on the door? Can they come in? Can they have a key and just come in? Or do they knock?
So the bill provides, and I'm looking on lines 29 to 30, that the city shall provide reasonable notice to the tenants of the date and time of the inspection. Now, there is a provision that random inspections can be provided, but that's in response to code violation complaints, okay? So there is that distinction there. And again, there is a specific provision there in lines 33 to 34 that if a tenant objects, the city, Topeka, has to get an administrative search warrant.
Okay. Senator Reichman?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to kind of piggyback on that last question on lines 29 and 30. They should provide reasonable notice to the tenant of the date and time. I guess my question is, what's reasonable? There has to be some kind of people are thinking about or whatever on that. I wonder if you could help me. Thank you.
That's an excellent question. I guess ultimately a court would decide, I guess, what reasonable would be if there was, if it was challenged, if the tenant complained about it, or maybe the property owner somehow was able to bring an action. So, yeah, that's a term that you see often in the law. So I think, it's often something that is looked at both by administrative agencies and trying to decide what it means, and also by courts. But, it wouldn't, especially since there's a reference to date, it probably, probably the same day, in an hour, probably would not be reasonable, right? But, 2 days from now, maybe it would be, so.
Senator Petty?
Thank you. So Charles, when it says about the direct public financial assistance, basically we're talking about they have a Section 8 voucher?
That could be, yes. As I mentioned, that direct public financial assistance is specifically defined, a financial payment or consideration from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. And I believe Section 8 money does come from U.S. HUD, so.
And then when back to that reasonable notice, would that then, would HUD be I mean, it doesn't reference HUD in here but it does say United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. But that they, in their own policies, have what reasonable notice is for their properties?
They could, it's possible, yeah. Now, that wouldn't really apply to, I'd have to look and see how that would apply. I don't know if that would really restrict the city as so much as, maybe restrict the payments to the,
Well, but of course, this does say privately owned, which would be different
Yeah.
from a HUD property. But I'm just thinking about that word reasonable when you're looking for a definition.
right. I mean, yeah. Certainly, if the committee wanted to put restrictions on that, that's an amendment that could, to define reasonable, that certainly could be worked out.
Maybe good questions for the proponents, too. Senator Bowser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was thinking, what happens if a tenant objects to the inspection? I'm looking on lines, 32 and 33. If a tenant objects to an inspection, the city shall obtain an administrative search to facilitate the inspection. Is that a search warrant, or what is that?
Yeah, so just like with the previous bill, we missed a word there, and it refers to search warrant. Yes.
All right, Charles, I don't see any other questions. We have proponents in the audience. We have Amanda Stanley, City Attorney, City of Topeka. Welcome back to the committee, Amanda. Good to see you in person.
Nice to see you too, Senator. Thank you so much for allowing us here today. So I'm going to try to answer lots of your questions and just simplify this bill a lot. First off, the Councilwoman and Representative Alcala, who have really pushed this bill, unfortunately had a situation and they were unable to be here today. But I encourage you to read their testimony because they really talk about the constituents that brought this forward and brought this to their attention, and were really passionate advocates for their constituents in this particular property, Timberley, which really inspired this bill. So Carrie Higgins with our housing services can answer all of your HUD questions and how direct government assistance works. But what you have are properties that have contracts with HUD, and HUD gets rent for each of these apartments. They have various degrees. And then these properties are supposed to be being inspected by the federal government on a regular basis. Pandemic, things stopped. Inspections did not ever really restart, and situations in lots of these places like Timberley got very atrocious. Carrie can talk about helping residents out with sewage in their basement and mold on their walls and bugs crawling up her legs as she was leaving. And these are places where the private landlord is receiving market rate rent from the federal government to provide housing that is in standards that no one would think was acceptable to live in. And Carrie can in her testimony, talk to you about how currently in state law, the reason we can't do this is because we are preempted from having a regular routine rental inspection program under state laws. The legislature says as a city, you can't do that. It's a consent only complaint-based system. In talking about it, you're like, well, that sounds scary, right? You're eliminating people's right to consent to come into their apartments, and that's not what this does. The Fourth Amendment still applies. We are still the government. We still have to comply with the Fourth Amendment. But what we find is that when you have a complaint-based only system, someone has to have the courage to be able to call about these atrocious conditions, and they're scared. Like, what do I do if I leave my house? Yeah, this is bad, but I don't have money to move. I can't go just get another apartment. I'm getting this assistance. And if I call in a complaint-based only system, they know it was me. And they're afraid of retaliation, and they're afraid of those protections. And yes, we have a retaliatory eviction ordinance, but that doesn't help you stop getting evicted. That only kicks in after you've already been evicted. And so these individuals get very scared to reach out. And so what having a periodic inspection program allows you to do is it allows you to get in the door and knock on those doors and ask for consent to search. And it's a whole lot easier to say, sure, come on in, than it is to call and ask you to come be the person that reports. It doesn't mean that we're going to go inspect people's houses that say no. If we knock on your door and you don't answer, while yes, we could go get an administrative search warrant, I think we thought that that had gotten fixed on the House side, so I'm glad you caught that because we thought that word had gotten added. But it is an administrative search warrant. That is not something that would be a routine thing. Where you might need it, however, is, let's say, the bottom floor, you're finding that water is coming through the ceiling and you need to get into the apartment above it because of the code violations. And let's say you can't get in or the person won't let you in, you might need to go get an administrative search warrant because the water's pouring through the floor. So there are situations where that might be necessary. But the real goal of this is to be able to have a program where we can go and inspect these apartments that are giving government-assisted funding. They're getting your tax dollars to provide substandard housing, and get in early through these periodic inspection programs. Because unfortunately, what you see is when these apartments get so bad that the residents really do reach out and it ends up on the news and it ends up in these situations, oftentimes what the Department of Housing and Urban Development does is they just cut the contract, and then you're left with an apartment complex that then as a city you're stuck with a vacant, fires, homeless people inside, vagrants, figuring out how to demo it, and you're stuck with all of that as that oftentimes out-of-state individual that owns the complex just leaves your community. So if you can get in early and you can save these affordable housing units in your community, that's essential. And so we know this bill won't prevent another Timberley from happening, but it gives us another tool to be able to go in on a regular basis and inspect. It does create a provision about randomized inspections if we're getting a certain number of code complaints in the apartment. So if we are getting lots and lots of complaints, it does make provisions where the landlord needs to cooperate with us to go in and do these inspections. In an ideal world, the federal government would be doing these inspections and these apartments would be the way they are supposed to be and we would never have to do this. But I think cities are very good at figuring out tools to help our constituents, and we are asking for that in this case. Fourth Amendment still applies. We're not going in without consent. We'll definitely be knocking on doors and asking for consent. We just need one more tool, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. One last thing on reasonableness. The reason reasonableness in state law generally is not described with a specific one is because it might vary. In general, when you're doing inspections, you're using reasonableness. You know you're doing that for a week out, more than a week out. But if the water is pouring in down from the floor and you're getting lots of complaints about trash, for instance, or that's outside, but let's say you're getting lots of inside complaints, reasonableness might be shorter because of the urgency of it. Like if you're getting complaints that there's no heat in an apartment and it's 2 degrees, the time frame of what is reasonable might go way down if you need to check and make sure that other apartments also do not have heat and those kind of things. So it is a variable standard, but we do try to give several days' notice when we go in and do various types of inspections now. One is just practicalness of government. By the time you have bureaucracy to get your inspections done, it takes time. But also, it's far more effective if the people know that you're coming and that they have time and that they are there and that they're aware that it is coming. So no one wants to spend resources on things that would not work. So we want to give people time so that we can make this an effective system. So I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Let's go ahead and answer questions now with you. So before you sit down, so we have Senator Bowser and then Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I'm curious why this is just limited to the city of Topeka. Did I hear you say there's a state law that prevents these types of inspections? And so just the city of Topeka, I guess, has come forward. It sounds like a good law. I don't know why we don't have it throughout the state.
I think on this House side, they decided that they'd rather test it out in one city, but we have no issues if you want to make it statewide. We just want to make sure that in our community we can deal with these issues.
You don't happen to know the state law off the top of your head, do you?
It's the one we're amending, so it would be the statute at the top. Sorry, I didn't have my copy of my bill in front of me, but yes, we are actually amending the statute that preempts it.
KSA 12-16?
Yes.
Maybe? Does that sound right?
Yep, 12-16, 138.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mrs. Stanley, would there be any objection from the city if we put like a 5-year sunset on this since it's such a narrow program and treat it as sort of a pilot?
The House already put a 5-year sunset on it, so.
Sorry,
no.
my apologies for missing that when I skimmed through it. All right, that answers my question.
Senator Petty.
Amanda, it's good to see you. Last time I saw you was just on TV last week, I think. I was looking at, I know this is not your testimony and it's coming up, but so with Topeka, you have quite a number of, just like Kansas to Kansas does, properties. So this does mean that there's an intention to, is there an intention to make this an annual on all these properties, or just looking at a process?
Yeah, and Carrie Higgins can talk about this a little bit when she testifies. We do have several HUD properties in our community, but we also have limited resources, right? So it's a resource issue. You want to use your resources the most efficient way possible. So if this passes, step one is we need the law changed so that we can even have a policy discussion so that my governing body can make that decision. So the next step would be an ordinance that decides, is this one where we are doing annual inspections, or do we want to target it based off of X number of complaints a year triggers inspections for certain complexes? That seems to probably be where the emphasis is, because it allows us to utilize our resources more efficiently. But ultimately, the governing body will have to look at that and make sure that we have staff to absorb this, as well as making it efficient and working with the landlords. Luckily, in general, like once you realize how bad a property is, the landlords have been fairly cooperative about working with it. But if you can get in there sooner to get these problems faster, then it's better for everyone involved. So.
Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda, it's good to see you. You look great. So in essence, since you spoke, I've changed my mind a little bit about the legislation. So in essence, this legislation would actually help the occupant.
Correct.
And
so I think that's one of the things that often bills like this get not passed through because people are thinking, oh, this is going to penalize the occupant. This is about helping our tenants that are in really tenuous situations and are scared to reach out because they don't have money for another apartment. And yeah, it's bad. Carrie can tell you a story, but when they were helping individuals move, one of the things that stood out to Rhiannon Friedman, our director of planning and development, was someone that said, this is so much better. And it was a place that had rat vermin and everything else in it. And to her, that was so much better because of the situations they were in. And so, like, to have the ability to help make sure that what our taxpayer dollars are paying for is truly what they are paying for, I think is good for everyone.
Madam Chair, if I may, and Amanda, on line 30 at the end of it, the landlord may be required to perform random inspections. So who is going to tell the landlord?
We have that in there because sometimes you get lots and lots of complaints about no heat, no water, no this, and the landlords have to comply with Kansas Landlord Tenant Act. And they have to comply with their HUD contract. They have to give lots of notice. They have to do all of these things. But oftentimes, if no one's making them do that, no one does that. And so there might be instances where, as a city, we want them to do randomized inspections. They still have to do that in compliance with their lease agreements and everything else. But really, the focus is on us being able to go in and help tenants by making sure that these apartments are up to snuff.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. And stay here just in case we have more questions afterwards, too. Okay, thank you. Next on the proponents list is Carrie Higgins. Let's see, care lead for Topeka Shawnee County Homeless Task Force. Welcome to the committee, Carrie.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. My name is Carrie Higgins. I am the lead for the Shawnee County and Topeka Continuum of Care. I'm also the Housing Division Director for the City of Topeka, and I'm here in support of House Bill 2099. This bill is crucial because it alleviates the burden that is placed on tenants. So particularly those that are living in an apartment complex that receives some sort of direct financial assistance from HUD, but they're living in substandard conditions. Conditions where the landlord is failing to make any of the necessary repairs. Tenants are very hesitant to voice their concerns for fear of retaliation. I have seen families living with mold-covered walls, bug and mice infestations, several feet of sewer in their basements, raw sewage that has been there for months on end. We're talking about families with young kids, kids crawling around on the floor. And they have sought help. They've tried to get their landlord to fix things, and nothing is done. Currently, the city does not have anything in place where we can enforce that. We also work very closely with the City of Topeka's Code Compliance Division. So when we get these complaints and phone calls from tenants, we will talk to them and explain what resources are available, and we'll ask them if they would feel comfortable allowing a code inspector to come inside and check out their unit, so that if we find these violations, we can then sort of force the landlord to make fixes, fine them if appropriate, those kinds of situations. And almost always, the tenant will say no. And they're saying no because if it's this one complaint that they are filing, the landlord is going to know it's them, and they fear retaliation. And so what this ordinance would do is it would allow us to protect the tenants. It takes the burden off of them and allows us to get in there and make the situation better. It does affect all of the different HUD-funded properties. So yes, Section 8 type vouchers, which are what we call client vouchers. So those vouchers go with the client and they go and find the housing. But also they're called project-based vouchers. So that means it's a multifamily apartment complex that the voucher stays at, but they are receiving HUD funding for that apartment complex. So we would strongly urge the passage of this bill. I can't tell you how many times I have stood before families. A family will say to me, "It's okay. It's not that bad." Because if I complain, if I speak up, the only other option for me is to literally be on the street and homeless, because we lack affordable housing. They're in income-based housing, and there's a wait list for that. So they don't speak up, and they have learned that this is okay. This is as good as it gets. But it's not okay. It is not okay for anyone to be living in those type of situations without any way or right to make it better. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you very much, Carrie. We do have Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for your testimony. I guess I just have one question on this. When the code inspector comes around, do they have to have, does the owner of the apartments or whatever, do they have to know about it or give permission for that or anything like that? Thank you.
So code compliance is allowed to inspect the exterior of a building, and they can do that without notification of the landlord. But getting inside, that is what currently the tenant has to agree to. And they still would with this bill. The difference is that if we are getting multiple phone calls with complaints about a specific complex, it allows us to go in a way that protects the tenants without fear of retaliation.
Oh, thank you. I understand the part about the tenants, but my question is the owner of the apartment, do they have to be aware of it or give permission for it? Thank you.
For interior inspections, with this bill, they would not have to give permission, just the tenant.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Carrie,
Thank you.
thank you very much. We do have written proponents, Spencer Duncan, Government Affairs Director, League of Kansas Municipalities. I see you out there also. And we do have a proponent that, oh, did you have a question?
On our written testimony, Madam Chair. Spencer Duncan, might I ask a question?
Oh, yes, let me finish this here. Christina Alcalada, City Council, District 2, City of Topeka, she's on our agenda as written, oral, she'll be written also. But Spencer, would you mind hopping up for a question?
Does anyone ever say no?
No.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to interrupt. Yes, Ms. Duncan, was your testimony written before this was narrowed in scope to Topeka? Because you implied that there's an opt-in for other cities.
Other cities could charter in, just like the reverse
So
can
they
happen
would-
on some bills where they can charter out of certain bills. So they could charter in.
So we don't need to open the door a little wider. There's a
No,
charter.
and I don't know that there's a lot. I mean, I think places like Wichita have had some of these same issues and may take a look at it. I don't know whether they will or not, but I think there are a few other cities based on size who may be like, thank you, this would be great. It's facing the same problem. But yeah, we wanted to keep it specific in scope and give cities that option as opposed to them feeling like, oh, do I have to follow this now? Or, so yeah.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Excellent question, Senator Clifford. But thank you, Spencer. All right, and then we have one more written. I didn't mention Representative John Alcala, Kansas House of Representatives, Senate House District 57. And we'll move on to our neutral. We have two more people to speak. Our neutral, Ed Justinia, President of the Associated Landlords of Kansas. Hello, Ed.
We opposed it because it was very unclear about what they were trying to say. With the amended version, as it states, it takes care of those problems. It limits it to housing and urban development, it limits it to the city of Topeka, it took out the counties, and more importantly, it put a 5-year sunset provision in it, which allowed us to experiment with this and see if it's actually going to work. I'd like to give you a brief history, though, of why we're in this position to begin with. Prior to 2016, certain cities were abusing the interior inspection rules by implementing a rental licensing program which required the landlords to force open the properties of the tenants, their private property, and do inspections, and sometimes 2 and 3 times a year, just if they didn't like them, quite frankly. And quite frankly, we put up with it for a long time because this is a tenants' rights issue. It doesn't have anything to do with landlords. It's a tenants' rights issue. And my question to the committee in 2016 when we introduced this bill was, would you allow the city to come to your personal home and say, we have to come in or we're going to shut the property down, which is what the cities were doing. And the response I got from one was, I'll meet them with a gun. Well, why doesn't the tenant have the same privacy rights as everybody else? Section 8 is not doing their job, and that's why this bill for Topeka is needed. I wish we didn't need to do this. I'm glad there's a sunset provision on it. I've suggested in committee in the House that maybe the city of Topeka needs to contact the people in Washington, D.C. and demand that Section 8 do their job. But they said that they've already tried that and it didn't work. Other cities are not having this problem from what I can tell. Section 8 is doing their jobs, so they probably won't opt into this. But this is a tenants' rights issue, and I know our association is called Landlords, but we recognize the rights of tenants, landlords, and property rights, and that's what's important to us. You talked about reasonable notice, administrative search warrants. That's the reasonable notice. When it comes to landlord rights to go in by landlord-tenant law, we have to give by court notice 24 to 48 hours before we can go in. So, I think that's it. It's going to be real short and sweet. So, like I said, we don't necessarily like this bill, but we're not going to oppose it because it doesn't take away anything.
Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Ed, do you like the word search warrant? I don't like that word if you're just going in to make sure that the living conditions are up to par.
Administrative search warrants, I don't like, period, but
because it makes the tenant sound like a criminal. I don't know.
How else do you do it, though?
I don't know.
I'd want a court to be able to do that. I don't want the city just to say, we're going to go in no matter what. I think they need to take that step to get the administrative search warrant. And that way the judge will be the one to decide whether there's reasonable cause or not.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ed, good to see you.
I've seen you, but
Known Ed for a long time. I appreciate you sharing with us about the fact of the position that your organization had taken prior to the House, with the House Committee, and then the changes that were made. I mean, that helps us to understand how well this process can work sometimes too. And I like the narrow scope. I know we've had many bills that have had a narrow scope for, like Land Bank, that had a narrow scope for when first introduced. And so it helps to see, just as I think was mentioned by Commissioner Duncan, that others might say, yeah, this could work for us too. So I appreciate that. Along with, I'm not always in favor of sunsets, but I think this might be the right thing here.
Well, thank you for joining us, Ed. And we have our last person to speak. We have our opponent, Patrick DeLapp, private citizen. Welcome back, Patrick.
I don't like this bill for a number of reasons. A lot of information has been presented for here. Under Section 8, or actually Housing Choice Voucher Program, Section 8 is kind of an old term, but everybody kind of knows what it is. My units, which I have on Section 8, are inspected every year, and that's a good inspection. They go through, they give me, tells me what I need to get done, and I correct them. If I don't get them corrected, they will stop funding. Now, in projects like this, what we're talking about, Timberley, that is a project-based. They have a frequency of inspection that's not every year. It's kind of based upon of what you scored before. In the case we're talking about, the owner bought the property on February 2021. If the property is refinanced or is new for somebody, the first inspection after they do other work is 2 years after that fact. So they would have had to have an inspection towards the end of 2023. That did occur. They did not do well. They scored 60 points, which then puts them on schedule. If you do not do well, we're going to inspect you every year now. And it's kind of like a scientific inspection. They don't get into every unit. They randomly pick these units, things like this. And these tenants renting there, just like mine, that's part of the agreements that they have to accept that payment on their behalf, is to allow these inspections to go on. It doesn't say third party or in another inspection for it, because they do a pretty good job. They look for safety and health. So the project didn't do well. The second inspection they had after the 2003 one, they flunked horribly. They got 0. So they killed the project. You lost your money. This is the 4th project since I've been paying attention that had large project that has failed in Topeka since 1990. My contention is the system works. Yes, the sewer line was backing up. They cleaned it a handful of times, kept on coming back. Unknown to the management company because they were dumb. It wasn't their problem. A block away, a 24-inch city sewer line had partially collapsed, and that's why it kept on backing up. I like the way the system currently works. If we go and let the city come in and start inspecting, they'll look for, beyond safety and health, things to do with aesthetics. Oh, you're missing that court around there. Oh, there's smoking damage in here. You got to paint the interior of the house. They also, on January 22nd of this year, they have a new memorandum come down. If you have any violations in reference to safety and health, we're not going to give you time to correct that. We're going to put you in court, and you have to pay a $76 fine. For example, 3-bedroom house, 3-story plus basement, 2-story plus basement, you have 6 fire alarms or smoke detectors are required. If one of them has a weak battery on it, $76 fine in court. Section 8 wouldn't do that to me. Section 8 says, get it repaired. Fine, I'll do it. They'll do the same thing. Worst case scenario, and Mr. Janskinia talked about what Kansas City had done previously when they had inspections, and they were using this for more serious crime enforcement. They were going into buildings with a video camera, looking for drugs, opening up dresser drawers, opening up the refrigerator or freezer, open up the freezer because apparently when you make meth, it's best to keep some of the chemicals frozen or cold so it doesn't evaporate. There's been other things. Wichita did a similar thing. Remember Dennis Rader, BTK killer? They were doing drug stops on roads. Not drug stops, stops, white males, because they knew it was a white male because of some DNA left at the things, trying to get people to swab the inside of the mouth to see if you're that man we want. Well, one guy didn't do that. I'm not going to give you my DNA. No, I don't have a search warrant. But they caught his license plate. They came over. They knew where he found out where he lived. They used code compliance to look at the outside of the house and found violations on the inside. Based upon the search warrant affidavit said, based upon my experience, what I see on the outside of the house reflects what's on the inside. We want a search warrant. Well, they got it. They kicked in the front door, guns drawn, threw the guy on the ground, swabbed the inside of his mouth. They also found some minor housing code violations. Oh, beyond that, door being broken too. Could we be doing this for the same thing? Could we have people stopped in a traffic stop and they found something on them? And, oh, you're on Section 8. We know where you live now. We're gonna get an administrative, you gotta let us in. We're gonna get an administrative warrant to come and see what else you got in that house. You have no choice in this matter. They'll be doing that. Longmont Housing Authority, they tried something and it was finally settled in 2017. What they did, and they used police. They were trying to get inside people's units after it's already been inspected by the Housing Safety and Violations, claiming they wanted to do, help us train this drug sniffing dog. Or we wanted to get in there to make sure everything's okay. Or you gotta let us in or we're gonna evict you. They also then later spun it to that they wanted to find out who's a drug addict and we're gonna get them help. No, they just wanted to get into this. Now, if you remember, Colorado, even recreational marijuana is legal. Well, the Housing Authority got the idea, well, this is federal dollars. Federal dollars is not legal, so we can do that. Well, guess what? 4 of the tenants sued them for this. They turned it up with ACLU. Didn't go all the way through the court. The Housing Authority and the police department decided to settle. The police officers were suspended without pay. The head of the Housing Authority lost their job. Between the two, they paid out almost $400,000. It's $100 a piece plus attorney's fees that they had to pay. How is this not going to be used in the same method, twisting it? I just don't like it. Now, if the city comes in, writes me up, I got $76 fine because one of my 6 batteries, smoke detector was bad, you know what? I'm going to have to rise. They're increasing my costs. It was stipulated here that these units are market rate. They are not market rate. They're affordable housing, so there's a limit on what you can charge. And they have it set for efficiencies, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms. I cannot exceed that. They will make me come down. Typically, the rates are set at 41% of the mean of the 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. And I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to really understand the difference between a mean and an average, but there's a difference. Meaning 59% are more expensive. Now, you do have the right under the 4th Amendment to be freed from unreasonable search and seizures. The tenants have agreed to let the Housing Authority, or in this large project, you understand the Kansas Housing Resource was the one that's supposed to be inspecting it, at their discretion. They also have the right to always call to go ahead and have it inspected. If it was me, it would be Housing Authority they would call. They have 48 hours to come and inspect the unit for problems. Then they'll tell me, and we'll get the things done and corrected. They have the right for privacy. I think this is a violation if they don't let them in of the right to be free from unreasonable search and seizures. Thank you.
I was going to say, we're just about out of time, but does anyone have any questions? All right, well, thank you for coming and testifying for us.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Sorry to push us on time. That was our last person on our agenda. So let's close the hearing on 2099. And thank you for staying the long meeting, and we'll see you